and getting to learn about a really important piece of legislation that is happening in Washington state with huge ramifications, which I'm really excited that Samir is going to teach us a lot about, because I don't know enough about it. And I imagine similarly for the rest of you, because you're here. I'm Rabbi Fine. Avi is my first name. I'm a rabbi at Temple of Hirsch, Sinai, which is in both Seattle and Bellevue. And I've been working with Earth Ministry for the last little bit of time. It's been a real pleasure. And the environment and environmental justice is an issue that is really close to my heart, both because of where I grew up, who I am, and certainly my perspective as a rabbi informed by Jewish text. And I want to invite Samir to introduce himself, and then Jessica to introduce herself.
Hey everyone, I'm really glad to be here. My name is Samir Ranade. I'm the Civic Engagement and Policy Manager for Vernon Centered, and I've been working with Jessica for a number of years now, maybe since 2015, in different capacities.
Awesome. Thank you, Samir. Jessica?
And my name is Jessica Zimmerle. I am the Program and Outreach Director at Earth Ministry and Washington Interfaith Power and Light. We are a multi-faith organization that specifically works with people of faith around environmental justice, both in houses of worship and also in how we show up in the public sphere as faithful advocates.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. And before we get into anything more, I want to give an acknowledgement about the land that we are on, that we may each be on different land. I want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and I honor with gratitude the land itself and the tribe. I think it's really important as we all relate to the environment to really think about the history of this land and who belongs on this land. Open up with a question that I'll quickly answer, which is, what is environmental justice? I think it certainly relates to the environment, nature, the earth, the planet, how we relate to it. And in particular, it's striving for a time, hopefully soon, where you live, your income, your race, whatever language you speak, your country of origin, don't determine how healthy and safe you are. That would be true justice. And as we probably all know, that is not currently the case. And even here in Seattle, maybe especially here in this area where there is a 13-year difference in life expectancy between those living in the Duwamish Valley compared to other parts of King County due to heavy pollution. And that's piece of that is why the HEAL Act is so important for us to be talking about. So I want, as I said in the last session, I'm a rabbi, so I'm going to invite us to do a little bit of text study to learn a Jewish perspective on some of these issues, and in particular, looking at a few texts about how we relate to the environment. These are coming from the very beginning, both in terms of the Torah, in terms of the Bible, the beginning of Genesis, and also the very beginning, like creation, when everything was created, at least according to the Torah. And then those are the first two. The third one is about that creation, but comes from a later text in Jewish history. It's from the rabbis writing Midrash. So we're talking about around 200 CE, so a lot later. But that text is kind of the rabbi's commentary on the earlier text. So it teaches us how the rabbis read those texts about the creation of the world. I'm going to introduce the text together, and then here's the framing question that I'll give you again before I break you into breakout groups. So from these texts, how do you understand how we are supposed to relate to the world? So what do the texts teach us about how we should relate to the world? And then two, how would you describe your current relationship with the planet and the people who live on the planet? Okay. So here we go. Can you all see this? Yeah, okay, beautiful. I'm gonna be brief because you're gonna talk about these together in your breakout rooms. From Genesis 2, And Adonai, God, took Adam and placed him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to guard it. So we have the story of the Garden of Eden, God putting Adam there. The role that Adam is given is to work the land and to guard it, is how I would translate the Hebrew. I think it has been translated differently. We'll go with my translation because I'm running the session. And now, Genesis 1, and God blessed them, the people, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and conquer it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth. Here is where I know Christians have used that text to talk about dominion over the earth. But let's discuss. So in this case, God is telling the people to fill the earth, to conquer it, and to rule some of the living things that are on the earth. Those are the first two texts. And now here we go. The third text is the Midrash. When the Holy Blessed One created the first human, God took him and led him around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said to him, look at my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. And all that I have created, it was for you that I created it. Pay attention that you do not run and lay waste to my world. If you ruin it, there is no one to repair it after you. This is one of my favorite texts, I think, in all of Jewish texts. So the first two talk about the role of people in the Garden of Eden, what God has put them there to do. The third text is the rabbis understanding it a little bit differently about what our role is. So here we go. I'm going to put a link to these texts in the chat. There we go. So if you click the link, that'll take you to the texts. And then I'm going to break you into breakout rooms, and we'll spend 5 minutes here. So first, read over the text again if you want. And then you're going to discuss how you read these three texts together. What do you think our role is in relating to the earth according to these texts? And then for you more personally, how do you understand your relationship to the earth? Sound good? Any questions? Okay, we're good. Here we go. I'll see you in like 5 minutes.
Hello.
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 Is there some way to see I guess
Here, I can share my screen for the text.
yeah, I'd love to be able to see that the third one.
Yeah, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. Oops. There. I can make it a little bigger even.
Oh yeah, for you, I have created it. It was for you that I created it.
So is it just going to be a couple of us, just the three of us, you think?
Yeah, I
I
bet.
think so. And Kathy, your name is familiar to me. Are you connected with Earth Ministry?
I have been in the past. I started 350 Seattle and 350 Washington State like 10 years ago. And then also started Seattle Neighborhood Greenways.
Wow. So you're a founder then, much like Ruth is, who founded Earth Ministry way back in the day too. So love to see women with good visions, bringing them to life.
Yeah, yay.
Wow. So how long ago, Kathy, did you do that?
The 350 work I started in 2009. And then Seattle Neighborhood Greenways I started in 2012.
Wonderful. Your name seems familiar to me too.
Yeah, well, I mean, those groups continue, which is great, you know. I mean, I've moved on to other things. I'm a city planner, so that's what I've been working on.
That's wonderful. So how do we read these scriptures?
Well, they're pretty aggressive, you know. I mean, the conquer it and work it and guard it, feel much more kind of aggressive, and I don't know the Hebrew well enough to be able to translate it in another way. But I definitely like the Talmud about, looking at it and admiring it and preserving it as opposed to conquering it.
Yeah. And the way I've always understood that we could think, from the Christian word dominion that we've had to live with,
right,
was that it doesn't mean to it meant more to be responsible for it, that we it's kind of like that it was created, it's like the third one, it was created for you, therefore it's yours to do the right thing with, as opposed to that means you have to ruin it,
yeah,
because you have every right to ruin it.
Well, dominate is dominion has the root of dominate, and maybe that's the problem, is that
Yeah, we hear it that way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am actually in seminary at Seattle University, and in my Hebrew Scriptures class, I wrote a whole paper about the dominion conversation. And what I recall, this was I would be really interested to go back and reread my own paper, but this was 5 years ago. But I recall that it does kind of mean, as you were saying, Ruth, that in the original context of the word choice does mean much more of a benevolent caretaking of all. Like if you have dominion over this, then you have that responsibility to be sure that all within that can thrive and do well. That's like the most basic recollection I have.
Yeah, it's a good thing we spoke first.
Yeah, with the expertise.
The expertise. Yeah, that's great.
So there might be other words for dominion. I mean, I like the word caretaker as a word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the word, what is it in the way my version has been, like a different, in the different section. I mean, there's two different places that it talks about this, and the other one is to tend it.
Okay, everybody's back, it looks like. Welcome back. I hope you had interesting, enlightening, fruitful conversations. May they multiply. Anybody want to share really briefly kind of what came up? Go ahead, Ben.
We talked about how, especially the Midrash was really beautiful in its message of sustainability. And you said that this was written in the 2nd century CE?
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And the fact that they've had this idea of sustainability for so long. And I don't know, I was comparing it a little bit to the message of Mufasa in The Lion King, that there's more to being king than getting your way all the time. And it's about protecting the balance and the circle of life, not just about, about taking all the resources.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool. Anybody else want to share? You don't have to. I was talking and Cameron was asking about that. What do we do with that text of conquer and rule over the earth? And I think my two answers are, one, it's why you can't read any text out of context and not in conversation with other texts, because they all exist together. And two, someone on Friday when I was studying this text understood it differently and said, the rule piece, almost like your Mufasa line, Ben, the rule means the humans have a responsibility to take care of everything. And that's what ruling really is. And I thought that was a really nice reread of that text. So I bring these texts because I think it's really important to be informed by Torah and our tradition as we engage in this work, which I think we each know is essential and so important. And it's really great to see, especially that midrashic text, that it was true for the rabbis too a long, long time ago. This work has these roots, these really deep roots in our tradition. And I'll just share one other text because I love text. And you may know this one. It's from Amos, chapter 5, verse 24. But let justice well up like water, righteousness like an unfailing stream or like a mighty stream. What I love about this is we are pairing justice and some piece of the earth, in this case, water, that there is an inherent relationship between our natural world and justice and righteousness and what we are striving towards. And I think it's a way of moving forward and moving backwards at the same time in the best possible way. These roots of connection to the land and moving forward because we have to do better. And I'll leave us there with those texts because I really want to hear from Samir and talk about moving forward and doing better. Certainly the work that he is engaged in, and the HEAL Act is one of these ways we can do that politically.
Great. Should I go ahead? Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see the screen? Okay. Well, Rabbi, I thought you actually gave a good definition and an explanation at the beginning about environmental justices and the differences in lifespans. But this definition that you see here on the screen is the definition that was developed by the Environmental Justice Task Force. And so in my presentation, I'm going to talk about the HEAL Act, Healthy Environment for All Act. And the task force was a part of that. In the effort in 2019, we tried to pass the HEAL Act, and the only thing we got was a task force. But there's been a substantial amount of work from there to get the HEAL Act again reintroduced in 2021. And I also want to just provide some context on a couple of definitions of things and go into the history of environmental justice. And I actually think the bulk of my presentation, I'd like to focus on these community meetings that I did, which helped to inform the HEAL Act. So, environmental justice in our country, I mean, I think, you could say in its purest form, the EJ movement really began, with around slavery and colonization. But, I'd say the modern EJ era started to take shape around the time that the civil rights legislation was passed. And so you look at there's a connection between labor, workers, and environmental health, and that was clear in Dolores Horta, who organized grape pickers and wanted to ensure that they weren't exposed to chemicals. Dr. King, in one of the last days of his life that he was seen there marching in Memphis, he was protesting the discrepancies between Black and white sanitation workers and how Black workers were paid less and also exposed more to dangerous things on the job. But most people say that the modern EJ movement kicked off in 1982. That's in North Carolina. There was a primarily Black rural community where the state of North Carolina wanted to dump a bunch of PCB chemicals, and it's in this landfill. It would have leaked and really been harmful to people, and there wasn't much community input into that decision, which community input is really arguably the most important part of environmental justice. So that wasn't there, and they did a protest, and it raised a lot of awareness. The protest, unfortunately, was unsuccessful, but it really set a bunch of things in motion. It led to the first People of Color Summit in 1991. It had a lot of groundbreaking studies One was by the Government Accountability Office that found that proximity to, I can't remember the exact word now, proximity to hazards or toxics is most defined by race. That's like the biggest indicator of anything, race even more so than income. So that was like a finding in that study, and that kind of eventually prompted President Clinton in 1994. He issued the first, this was the first executive order on environmental justice. And, you know, it's still on the books right now, but the implementation of it has been, you know, start and stop. It's an executive order. It's not a law. So we want to make this a law, because when it's a law, then the agencies, they have to follow it. So, you know, that's basically what the HEAL Act is. It's codifying environmental justice. But I think one thing to note, though, is that what we are asking with environmental justice and with this policy, we're not asking for the creation of any new environmental programs, or any new regulations. All we're asking is that the government do a better job of implementing existing laws and enforcing them, and you know, prioritizing funding. Okay, Rabbi, you touched on this a little bit, but this is the targeted universalism. This is kind of what really guides what is the purpose. It's the fact that if you want to achieve a goal like the Clean Air Act, which is to provide clean air for everybody, and including sensitive populations, then you have to implement that law with sophistication, because different communities have different or different circumstances, you know. So targeted universalism recognizes that you provide effort, support to communities that have less advantages than another, in order to achieve the same standard of health, you know, across the state in this case. So this formula, I've dropped it in the map, so you can look at the health disparities map, but it's basically a way to really get a sense of the cumulative risks in a community. What are the, you know, because it's like when you compound all of these different factors, then you kind of get a full sense of like how many issues there are, how at risk is this community to hazards. And so it's a function of environmental exposures, and like, you know, exposure to pollutants of various kinds, environmental effects, which is, you know, the proximity to things that could be hazardous. Maybe you live next to a dam or something that could breach, or you live next to a lagoon, or, you know, a Superfund site, and if there's a storm, then you're at a high risk. So that's environmental exposures and effects, and then socioeconomic factors, race, education, employment, linguistic vulnerabilities, transportation burden, and then sensitive populations. There's two statistics in there, one for low birth weight babies and cardiovascular problems. So adding all of that gives you a true sense of like how the community looks, and there's a ranking. And so this, you know, the context of this would have been initially put in Initiative 1631. That was the carbon fee initiative that was on the ballot in Washington State, and had that measure passed, the program, the investments would have had to have been guided by this map to ensure that those communities who are the most impacted by pollution get prioritization investment, you know, in direct proportion to the amount by which they're burdened, the inverse of that. So we didn't pass that. Well, obviously, as you all know, we didn't pass that law, but we decided to keep it alive. But like that idea of requiring, you know, highly impacted communities to get a priority of all the environmental spending, we decided to kind of take that frame and just make it into its own law, and we expand it a little bit and apply it to all environmental laws. So it basically, you know, we wanted to have all environmental spending be prioritized. We wanted the government in its human resources, in its strategic planning, in its enforcement, in rule makings and in community outreach to also incorporate environmental justice to, really create a fairer process and give more people a voice. So that was the HEAL Act of 2019, the legislation that we proposed. It did not get enacted. We made a lot of progress though. We passed it out of both chambers of the legislature in whole, but it didn't make it out of the out of conference as both chambers coming together. We couldn't get them to do that. They did fund the Environmental Justice Task Force, however. That would have been a part of the HEAL Act. That task force would have been to provide advice and guidance to agencies on how to implement their objectives. And so the legislature created this task force, funded it with $390,000, and directed it to hold public meetings over the forthcoming year and develop recommendations on how state agencies can effectively incorporate environmental justice into the work that they do. That was the charge of the task force. It consisted of a lot of the groups on there were state agencies, but there were also community members. There were about 4 community members. Front and Centered was one of them. That's the organization I work at. We were the co-chair along with the Governor's Council on Environmental Health Disparities. There was the businesses. There was the Association of Washington Business. There was the Washington Farm Bureau. Notably, the Farm Bureau kind of wanted to protest this, so they actually didn't show up after the first meeting because I think they didn't want their stamp of approval to be on their report. And so clearly, the Farm Bureau is, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done there to get them to appreciate environmental justice. So the task force, in order to develop these recommendations over the course of that time, they did these public meetings across the state. My job was to do a parallel public meeting in the communities where the task force was going. I would go a couple weeks in advance and work with our members on just doing like a training on environmental justice, background on it, and then talking about the issues so that we could start a dialogue and people could begin being comfortable just throwing out ideas and stories, and then we would have like all of that practice. We'd then go to the official public meeting that the task force would have a week later, and we'd offer it as public comment, so it would help to inform the recommendations. And as you can see, we had to go to Zoom soon at some point, but we only actually did 3 meetings in person. All of the rest were in Zoom, but it made it more accessible in many ways. Certainly, it takes away the in-person thing, but Zoom has its advantages, and it allows you to capture things on the chat box. It's easy to record. So I thought it really everything continued to go well in terms of the information that we got, and I will share a link to the community report, and I'm actually going to cover a couple of the themes in that, but I wrote a report on those findings. So I can just quickly try to go through these. The themes that kind of rose to the top. I mean, I think the first one is pretty clear. If you don't have basic needs, then you're more risk from environmental threats. Like if you don't have health care, for example, then when you get sick from a pollutant, you're just that much more disadvantaged or likely to be affected by that pollutant. If you don't have a roof over your head, I mean, you could think of all kinds of just basic needs that affect how you're impacted by environmental threats. Another one is just the injustice. The injustice in our country has really led to BIPOC communities being disadvantaged and face the highest risk of pollution. People brought up examples of COVID and just being hospitalization rates, obviously redlining, the practice where if you were Black in most of the country, you couldn't live in certain areas. and the areas where you could live, where in close proximity to major roadways are polluting, or like factories, and there's still a legacy of that today. We had Deb Abramson, a woman who's a part of many tribes, including the Spokane tribe, and she shared a very tragic story about salmon, and how the colonization had really just deprived the community of salmon and the rivers, and how that's contributed to even poverty today, and how the federal government doesn't adequately fund the Indian health services, and so there's all kinds of things that people brought up that show that these unjust policies in other areas need to be fixed so that everybody can have a healthy, thriving environment. And then the other one was just kind of to reflect the third theme, that people brought up a lot of examples of just pollutants that they were concerned about. A lot of the farm worker groups, talked about various pesticide exposures, and kind of said they wanted the corporations to be held accountable. Some other people talked about just trash that they would see. I mean, trash was actually a very common thing that people brought up when you talk about the environment. People actually bring up trash a lot, and so that was something that people mentioned, and pollution in rivers. And so, this is another thing that kind of we're going to focus on in our recommendations. The theme 4 really goes back to what I mentioned around farm workers. There were just some really tragic stories about as their bosses didn't really care about whether they took breaks and whether they had to work in cold weather. And obviously there's a huge link to climate change with this. As it gets hotter, then farm workers will endure more hardship. As with the wildfires we've seen a couple of years ago, they've also blocked the sun. So it's even made it hard to actually be out in the fields. So it's cost people their jobs. And one of the prevalent themes that also came up was just the poor oversight of the government, and violations aren't tracked very well. The government doesn't have great relationships with farm workers, and farm workers themselves are also afraid of reporting for fear of retaliation. The other many environmental regulations are designed to enforce in ways that harm frontline communities. This is just a reflection of the fact that if you don't take community input in rulemakings, in permittings, then there will be unintended consequences or consequences as a result of carelessness. And then the last one is we've asked a lot about community outreach, which is a huge part of the government work. How can the government do a better job of engaging communities? And there were a lot of things that we heard. Some of them were that make public meetings at a more convenient time, recognizing that people like farm workers, for example, don't work conventional schedules. Provide interpretation. Go to churches. Go to where the community is at. Provide childcare. Compensate certain. If you create an advisory board, out of these public advisory boards, and you specifically had people from disadvantaged communities, offer some compensation for them. And so one thing is that when you do rulemakings, we don't want, or it's unjust if those rulemakings are just dominated by the industry. They should also have the voice of the communities who are most impacted, but clearly that's not the case right now. But we're going to work to change that with the HEAL Act. I just wanted to share to give you a sense of some of the indicators of progress, because we wanted to ask is like, how do we know whether the community is healthier? Because that's our goal, is to make the community healthier. What are the signs? How can we measure it? And so just the signs that people listed of indicators of a healthy community. This is what you see here. Fresh food, healthy food, that was brought up a lot, because, as I'm sure, so that like fresh food, actually fruits make you actually resilient to pollution. I've heard that broccoli can flush pollution out of your body. And all of these things are just, they're really important indicators of how well you can make an impact in your community, how you can access certain resources, and what safety measures there are to protect you. So that was also valuable. So out of all that info, that was the info that I gathered from the community conversations, and it really shaped the task force recommendations. So this is what the task force recommended on a high level. Interestingly, they proposed an additional task force to study reparations, and there was the link drawn between the need for reparations and environmental injustices. One thing that I thought was interesting was enforcement. When there's a violation of a law, there's an opportunity for a polluter to work with the community on some type of a mitigation project as a remedy. And there's actually one bullet I didn't put on here, but it's also ensuring that there's better coordination between agencies at different levels. People brought up examples of the Yakima Clean Air Agency not enforcing clean air laws that it had to. And so how can we ensure that the Department of Ecology coordinates better with them? A 1631-like recommendation that I really liked was all state environmental investments have to prioritize women and minority-owned business enterprises and those owned by veterans. And it also had to work with companies that value labor standards. So, that shows that links to EJ. I would say, there are easily the goal that is one of the most core goals that you can easily just think about is the prioritization of resources. It is ensuring that money from a carbon fee or whatever environmental program there is, a certain percentage gets spent on overburdened communities. In the New York climate change law that they have, it's 40%. I've just heard the Biden administration with all the stuff that they're doing, I think they're thinking 40%. So typically 35 to 40% is the baseline for that. And another thing was the map. The map is a valuable tool, but obviously it needs to be updated in order for it to remain valuable. And then there's other indicators that we can add on there, but there has to be support to do the research and develop those. So these task force recommendations came out in a report towards the end of November, and it was turned into the HEAL Act. The HEAL Act, I should say, is still a work in progress. I mean, a bill has been introduced. Vernon Centered has had a major role in working with Senator Saldana. Rebecca Saldana has been like the lead sponsor of it. And we're also working with Cascadia Law Group, in particular, actually the two former directors of the Department of Ecology, Jay Manning and Maya Bellin, are a part of that. So we're working on the policy. I'll just go into the high level elements. Defines EJ in state law, requires using a racial justice lens and agency strategic plans, enforcement, reporting, directing the funding, as I mentioned, protecting tribal community sovereignty and rights in all actions. Community participation is very significant, ensuring that it's equitable, that communities do robust outreach that's accessible in different languages, and also the screening tools, the map. I don't remember exactly what the thing is, but there's something about using the map to track progress of how how a community is getting better. But clearly that would require the map to be updated, and things around just reducing barriers for community groups to get access to contracting. An interagency work group, the details of this are still being worked out, but there will be some type of a work group, either a council or maybe a council and then a work group of just agency staff. The goal of this is to kind of provide some oversight at a high level of the agency actions to ensure that they are being implemented in a just manner, provide guidance. I think the issues that are still being worked through is that, there's legal limitations on what a volunteer appointed council can do versus an agency. They can't necessarily dictate certain actions that agencies do. So we're just working through that. But the solution really is for the council to provide recommendations on prioritization of, maybe they can't say what actions you should take, but of the actions you do take, this is how you should do them to be just, and this is how they should be prioritized. And requiring an EJ analysis, and then again, funding the map. So the current status of the bill, the HEAL Act, it had a hearing on January 20 in the Senate Senate Environment, Energy, Technology Committee. It just, as of last hour, just heard that it is scheduled for an executive session. That's a vote in the committee on February 4. So, so that's our focus. But, there are things that we can do, and I'm working with Jessica on that. So, yeah, and I know I may have gone through the bill really fast, but I can, if you have questions, I can answer you, Jessica. I'll stop and share.
Anybody have a question? You can also type it in the chat if you prefer. Susan? Yeah.
I'm thinking about, I live in and work in South Seattle, in Southeast Seattle. And, we've got problems here with, as you're talking about contaminated soil and development projects that can't move forward because of the contamination and not able to go after those that created the contamination. Is that something that's you're working on?
It's possible. So if I think I understood, you're talking about like legacy polluters who pollute land and then their factory shuts down and leaves. Yes. Now I don't know environmental law well enough off the top of my head, but I presume to the extent that the Department of Ecology is within their purview to work on that, they can. It could be done in a more vigorous manner. If it would assess like the health damage of that toxic soil and prioritize it in terms of enforcement as it's merited. So I would say it's very likely that something like that could be speeded up, where the HEAL Act to be implemented. I'll just note though, some of this stuff, you don't even need a new law. Like assuming that it's accurate that ecology already works on this, you may just need more money for enforcement agents too.
Nice to see our youngest climate activist here. Hey, Gabriella. Anybody else have any questions? All right, I'll turn it over to Jessica, who's gonna give us some next steps and ways we can help to push this forward.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi Fine. And thank you so much, Samir, for your presentation. I've been organizing on this policy and I learned a lot from you still tonight. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us all. We do want to continue showing up as people of faith in support of the HEAL Act. And our state legislative session has just begun. We are only in week 3, so there's plenty of time to get engaged. It's going to run through April. So we have many hurdles between now and passing the HEAL Act that we are going to leap over together. And Earth Ministry is your local resource for how to plug in to this work and to show up really as a member of the Jewish community, to share your values of why you're showing up. That is really the gift that the religious community can bring within this overall very broad coalition effort. Our role is to center things in the heart and remind our decision makers of their moral obligation to hear the input of these communities, as Samir shared, has been gathered, and to implement that in a way that is just and systemic. So I am going to share a couple of resources here in the chat for you. The first is Earth Ministry's legislative priorities website. So I update this daily. It's a great one to bookmark. It will have the HEAL Acts and share where it's going next. There's also some fact sheets you can download. You can read more. You can see what other bills Earth Ministry is supporting for climate justice. But the HEAL Act is one of our 2 top priorities, and we really see it so clearly aligned with faith community values. So that website has lots of goodies for you. I would also, if you're not already, encourage you to get connected to Earth Ministry overall, because I send really timely action alerts that make it very easy for you to step in and put your faith into action. So I'm going to put in next our sign up form to join our community and receive my action alert emails. I promise we're very mindful about how many we send and try to keep it strategic and geographic. Okay, so that is those 2 pieces. And then the third piece, which I actually forgot to pull up, perhaps Leanne, you could drop it in for me, is a link to another session that Earth Ministry will be hosting as part of the Jewish Climate Festival. So on Sunday afternoon, we are going to be doing a Advocacy 101 training. And that will go into much more detail around what it actually looks like to show up at the state legislature and support the HEAL Act, how to craft your story around your faith values, what that looks like, and some time to practice that together. So that event is free, like the whole festival, and we would love to see you again there. Thank you, Leanne, for the link. If you want to really get some of the more technical tools. But at the most basic level, you have opportunities that are rather low barrier to support the HEAL Act. This year, of course, our legislative session is remote. And so that has its pros and cons, but one pro is that you can now sign in for a bill when it is heard in a committee from anywhere. So previously, you had to be either in the hearing room or connected to the Wi-Fi on the Capitol campus to support a bill. And that's just to sign in, your name is on the record, and it says pro or con for this specific piece of legislation. Now we can do that from afar, and that is really an important way to show broad community support. You can write under organization the name of your synagogue. You know, it doesn't say you're signing on for your synagogue, but it says you're a member of that community. You could write Earth Ministry. You could leave that part blank too and just be yourself. But that is a great way to show up and show broad support. The one other tool I'll share is that our state has a pretty nifty legislative hotline, which is just a phone number that you call, and an operator will pick up the phone and take a note for you and deliver that to your legislators. It will go to all three of them. I think you might at least used to still be able to send it to the governor as well, to boot. And you can have your bill number ready. So say I'm calling about the HEAL Act, Senate Bill 5141, right? Yes. And I really do, did I get the bill number wrong? Let's be sure. Samir, will you drop that bill number in the chat?
Yes, yeah, you got it right, but yeah, I'll
Okay.
drop it in the chat.
I've still got so many new numbers floating around that I don't want to give you the wrong one. So you can have your bill number ready. They'll take your address so they can confirm what district you live in, and then they will deliver your message. And in that, I always just encourage you to say multiple times, I'm calling because this is part of how I'm expressing my Jewish faith. Or this is really important to my Jewish community. I spent my Wednesday night learning about it. And so I want to be sure that it's on the radar of my senator. So just a short note that will get delivered. And then there's more involved options if you want to build relationships with your legislator and really send emails, work to get constituent meetings. We'll have options for that throughout session. So there are plenty of ways to engage. And if you are really jazzed about this, feel free to just send me an email. I'm going to put my email in the chat as well, and we can connect one-to-one, or we could also do workshops for your synagogue. We often teach our Advocacy 101. We could do, maybe share the recording of Samir's presentation and do a kind of revisit of this, if that would be exciting. So we tailor each workshop to meet each faith community where they're at, and would be happy to help bring it in to yours. And I forgot the phone number for the legislative hotline. It is 1-800-562-6000. Leanne's got it. Okay, so that's my plug, and I do hope that you will put your faith into action with us. I'm so grateful for Temple de Hirsch Sinai for wading in and hosting this event so that we can all see the moral imperative of supporting the HEAL Act that Front and Centered has worked so hard on, and Samir has just done excellent organizing around. So we've got your back, Samir, and are excited to help continue supporting the bill through session.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi, for hosting this. I think it really comes down to moral values, which I think underpins a lot of religion. Like the HEAL Act is about justice and just, compassion and humanity, ensuring that everybody can be treated fairly. So, I think there's that connection. And I put that tip in the chat. So if you want to describe your community to your legislator, look on the map and see where it ranks. Chances are it ranks badly in some category, and that's something that you could potentially highlight.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Jessica and Leanne. And thank you all of you who are spending your late evening with us, super late if you're Ben on the East Coast. And I really encourage you to act. And we saw how easy it is for us to express our support for this act and how important it is for all of us. And also check out Front and Centered, which Samir is a part of. It's an amazing, as I understand it, a coalition of groups of people of color who are working towards justice in so many different areas. And it's awesome. It's awesome work. So thank all of you. You can reach out to me, to Jessica, here to be resources. And Jessica will have the recording, and I think it'll be up on Earth Ministries website, and we can also send it out to you if you're interested too. And I wish you all a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.